Hello and welcome to this very special live broadcast across 3 channels, LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. And I feel very relaxed about doing this because I'm doing this with a very good friend, very dear friend, somebody who means a lot to me, Joseph McGuire. Joseph, how are you?
Hi, Simon. Great to be here.
It's good to see you and good to see your smiley face. And we were both talking beforehand about we're both feeling like we're in a good place, which is a lovely thing. And because that's what we're going to be talking about. The whole area of alignment, and specifically whether leadership and self-alignment are and should be compatible. And so I don't need to say too much about me. My work focuses on helping business leaders and organizations grow. And Joseph, what's your main body of work for those watching and listening?
I currently describe myself as a facial profiler, in that I work with an ancient Chinese tradition, which is literally reading people's faces for their communication patterns, behavior patterns, personality traits. And I work in the area of particularly helping with senior level interviews or negotiation, or helping teams with their internal and external communication. Because as we know, the fact that we're technically speaking the same language doesn't mean we understand or process language in the same way. So I'm helping people recognize each other's communication styles so that people get their message across effectively in the way the person they're talking to, the people they're talking to, need to receive and process it.
Yeah, wow. And I find it fascinating and profound. And the whole area of authenticity in your work, to what extent can you read the authenticity or otherwise of what somebody is saying to you, or the way they're behaving, or the way they're looking? To what extent do you look at their authenticity, or does it just come out at you? Maybe explain a little bit.
Okay, well, I've been doing this for a long time, obviously. I mean, I've been working with this stuff for almost 40 years at this point. And one of the things I've learned is to not look, and it may sound almost counterintuitive, but in the same way that we shouldn't be looking for deception, we shouldn't be looking for authenticity. And again, it does go back to what you were talking about at the beginning. It's about self-alignment. It's about knowing one's own values, being clear in one's own values, and living accordingly, and then also being calm, clear, and relaxed. And when we're doing that, it's not just about observation, because I don't just work with observation. Our whole body is an antenna. And what most people are not tuned into is how their body actually is and what their body is telling them. And we talk about gut feeling, for example. But neuroscience tells us we have 3 brains. We have one here, we have one in the heart, and we have one in the gut. And when those 3 brains are aligned, we are aligned. We're relaxed, we're calm, we're clear. And then our whole body will tell us whether somebody we're talking to or somebody we're dealing with is actually being authentic or not. And that doesn't necessarily, that means it's authentic according to their own values. It doesn't mean we're necessarily going to like them or get on with them, but at least if we recognize that they're consistent in where they're coming from, it's much easier to deal with them, at least to figure out how to deal with them.
Absolutely. And I talk about, for me, needing to like, trust and respect people. And it's much harder when they're not consistent. You're right, because you're kind of second guessing and you then start guessing yourself. And that's wonderful. Thanks for that. Thank you.
Yeah, I have one for you here. So you have extensive international experience as both a lawyer and a CEO. So, and how did you determine whether colleagues or counterparts were being authentic or not? And then also, how important was that to you?
Okay, well, I'll answer the second part first. It's very, very important because as a negotiator and as a business person and as a leader and generally in life, you need to be able to influence and to be assertive and create win-win outcomes. And as you've just said, if you're dealing with an inconsistent target, I'll use the word target, right? It's a human being, but let's talk about a target in negotiating terms. It's very, very difficult to optimize your own outcomes and also optimize the win-win outcomes for the person you're dealing with. So the way I do it, and I've written a couple of books around this whole space, is it's all about preparation and planning. So when I go into a negotiation or a business conversation, I think in terms of, and it sounds a little bit formulaic, but I do this, 3 stages of assessment: self-assessment. So I say, right, Simon, where am I at? Where are you at today? Are you feeling calm? Are you feeling aware? Are you feeling agitated? Are you present? Are you not? Second then is situational assessment. So what is the situation? Like right now, you and I are talking live on 3 channels, and there are obviously people going to watch it live and obviously afterwards and take stuff out of it. And then the third area of assessment is then assessing as best as I can who I'm talking with. What are they saying? What are they not saying? Why are they not saying things? How are they looking? Are they looking up at me? Are they looking down? Am I sensing reluctance? And I'm not an expert, right? I'm not an expert, but it does come with kind of that gut, heart, mind alignment. But I think you can only feel that and sense that heart, gut, mind alignment if you've done the self-assessment part first. So I think it's those three aspects. So back to you, Joseph. So do you think many people are bursting to be more authentic, and yet too fearful to come across as authentic?
Interesting word, bursting. Yeah, I think more and more, certainly I've done a lot of business networking over the years, and certainly from private conversations I've had with people, and I've done a lot of that, and from more both pre and during COVID, what I find is people are opening up more and more in terms of what's really going on in their personal lives and how that's impacting on work. But what I'm also hearing is that more people are aligning in a very loose way business networks outside of their immediate work environment, because they find they're more comfortable outside it, being authentic and being real and being open and allowing themselves to show their vulnerabilities in those looser networks. But that's also bringing value because of that, because they're more relaxed. They can behave in a much more relaxed, clear, confident way, and they're bringing greater value to the networks than they're necessarily being able to bring in their direct work environments, which is a very interesting phenomenon in itself.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I had a conversation with somebody recently about if you're an introvert or a quiet extrovert, as I am. I prefer my own company, but I'm not shy, but I'll be quiet. In some respects, it's easier to communicate online like this because you don't have to go through the hassle of getting ready, going out, walking into a room full of lots of people to hone in one person. You just deal with one person in the comfort of your own house wearing pajamas or tracksuit or whatever. So I think there's a lot to that. But whether that denudes the whole area of authenticity or not, that's another question. But that was interesting. It was interesting.
Yeah, we're obviously in hugely changing times, and times that are unprecedented, and people are having to address issues and life challenges in ways that they've never had to do before. And I think that's causing people to come forward and admit more to what's really going on for them. And I know you and I have had these kind of discussions before, and people are being more open. Where it goes in terms of work, the workplace and business, I think that's still very much in flux.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was great.
You, in terms of your experience over the years, you've worked with what I might call more mainstream business environments, but you've also worked with indigenous cultures. Yeah. And would you have noticed much difference in terms of the authenticity of communication and presentation between people from those more indigenous cultures and the more mainstream business environment?
This is a huge question. I can answer it in two ways. Okay, so the quick answer is yes, right? So I was privileged when I lived in Australia. I spent 6 years working in indigenous economic development as a CEO, as a C-suite person for a big mining company, and also as a consultant to the Indigenous Tourism Council of Australia. And so I got to know indigenous people quite well, Australian indigenous people, New Zealand people from New Zealand, Alaska, from various places. And put it this way, generally, there's a very interesting statistic that we don't hear enough about, that the indigenous people of this world are guardians of 40% of the geographic landmass of this planet in terms of square kilometers. The problem is that the mainstream world is denuding that rapidly. So they have a very proud heritage. 40% of the global planet, living planet, land, they are guardians of it. And they're also extremely, so they think in a very long-term, sustainable, holistic way. That's just part of their culture, whereas the mainstream, particularly the Anglo-American business world, is much more, as you know, quick wins, annual returns in a company, so it's very different from a philosophical, spiritual basis. The indigenous. So I think, there is more of an enduring. It's not a forced authenticity with indigenous. It's just who they are. They are. That's the way they live. And the other aspect of this, though, is I think you kind of overgeneralize when you just compare it with the mainstream. Because I had a conversation earlier on today. There's the West and there's the East. So in the East, meditation, mindfulness, balance underpin a lot of communication, which I find as being true to the human spirit. Whereas in the West, generally, it's more about business through textbook analysis and theories and all that sort of stuff. So I think there's a whole minefield here. But yes, there's a big difference between the way indigenous people generally behave and communicate, and it is much more mainstream. That it can be confronting to non-indigenous people, but that's just the way they are. They're anchored to the land and to their spirituality. That's all being confronted, though, unfortunately, today. So that's a very interesting question.
I know that's a topic we could probably discuss for weeks on end.
I know.
We're seeing so many changes there in the world at the minute.
I know. So back to you. How would organizations benefit if employees were given help in determining their own alignment? I mean, I actually think that's quite a complicated question. But how do you think organizations would benefit if their employees were given help in determining or sourcing looking at their own alignment?
I think there's been a huge amount of work done in this area over the years. Like, you've got Great Place to Work, you've got somebody like Simon Haigh who's done a lot of research in this area, the Happiness Advantage, for example. And what the research shows is that people would be far more motivated. There'd be much less, the obvious stuff, much less absenteeism, morale would be greater, people would be more willing to engage. And what I'm seeing, both in the research I'm reading and in terms of just anecdotal evidence from talking with people now, where so many people are working from home, is that there's greater disengagement in many companies and many organizations, and this seems to be globally. In fact, I came across a survey published in the Harvard Business Review recently, where 77% of leaders thought they were doing a great job of engagement, but 88% of employees thought their leaders were doing a particularly bad job. And most tellingly, 65% of employees would forego a pay rise if their leaders were fired. So it tells you there's something, to quote Hamlet, or to quote Shakespeare, there's something rotten in the state of Denmark in a lot of organizations. And it's the ones, in my view, who really are, where the leaders really are aligned and are very, very clear about their values and know how to communicate it right down the chain of command. And the chain of command is a term I would use very loosely, where the chain of command is not too hierarchical. They're the companies and the organizations which will really prosper, because they will know how to benefit from really engaging with their employees in a very aligned way.
I think you're completely right. I've worked for a couple of multinationals, and often the problem in hierarchies, and I'm not pointing any individual fingers, is not the people at the very top and not the everyday workers. It's the middle to senior managers who have points to prove, so they're looking behind them, and they're also looking ahead of them, and they can often be gatekeepers, and they are often, for one of the less blunt expression, they're often the biggest problem in organizations, is those people in middle senior management, in that middle senior kind of that area of hierarchy, and it's a major problem. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I heard Admiral Mark Mellett, who's the Chief of Staff of the Irish Defence Forces, talking recently about organizations, and he referred to ego-driven silos. I think that describes exactly what you've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Ego-driven silos. You're right. That's interesting. Thanks.
Happy to share. Yes. My apologies. I know I should have these questions for you ready and running, but I have to actually read them from the page here. Are organizations losing out by not actively supporting and encouraging employees in their own alignment? And if yes, what do they need to change?
The quick answer is, reflecting what you just said, Joe, yes, is the quick answer. And there are two main areas that would cause me biggest concern. The one is for the younger generation, and one is for the older generation. So my biggest concern is, particularly in lockdown like this, and if we're all going to be moving away from being in the offices together, that lack of alignment. How are the younger generations going to be mentored? How are they going to pick up the tacit knowledge that's in 80% of knowledge within Western organizations is tacit knowledge. It's in the head of the older people. How is that going to be transferred? And then conversely, as I've just said, in the Western world, 80% of knowledge in corporations, big old American companies like Ford and Boeing, that's in the heads of people your and my age and even older, right? Yeah. When they go, or when they're not in the office, who's accessing that tacit information? It's a massive problem. And whereas in China, they've kind of already pre-addressed this, and because they can, right? They can control things a lot better. So a lot of that tacit knowledge is actually, put in within their explicit knowledge management system. So I do fear for the West, right? For Western companies in particular, if they don't find a way of actively supporting, encouraging employees to be part of a mentoring, keeping their older folk or even retired employees plugged back into some sort of alumni thing. And so I think it's a minefield of an area, which is, we could talk about this for a long time, but I do see concerns ahead, because I can't actually see us in the foreseeable future, if ever, going back to 9 to 5. I can't see it. I think this is a circuit breaker. And on the one hand, it's great, but I don't think organizations have got their head around this knowledge management mentoring issue. It's a big issue.
Absolutely it is. And I'm hearing the phrase living at work used increasingly often, where people feel there is no separation between home and work, and the stress and strain that's putting on them as individuals.
Yeah.
And that has to impact on performance, of course, as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. So back to you. Do you think this difficult period, and it is difficult, will allow employees to align more with their companies, or will there just be lip service paid to a more sensitive, aligned time?
Well, again, this kind of follows on from your last answer, actually, because I think people are feeling more isolated because they're not engaged they're not physically engaged, they're not physically meeting their colleagues. So there's the lack of that engagement with that tacit knowledge that you talked about, but there's the lack of camaraderie. In many tech companies now, bigger tech companies, they're missing out on the perks they were accustomed to, which is a novel experience for a lot of the younger workforce. We wouldn't have had it. We grew up without it, but a lot of younger people are, and the younger workforce are learning to work and act and operate more as individuals. So I question whether there is going to be, or how there's going to be, a really sensitive engagement between companies of bigger organizations and their workforce. I think you're going to see greater flux in terms of employees moving more quickly between company. So I think that's a huge issue, but I question whether they're going to be doing more than paying lip service.
No, I would have the same concern as well. I think organizations, I do think that a lot of them have just buried their head in the sand this year and hope that this goes away. I don't think this is going to go away, even if COVID goes away, which is not going to be quick, right?
No.
I think we've gone to sleep in 2019 and we've woken up in 2030, and the quicker executives and shareholders realize this, the better. But that was great. Thanks.
Yeah, there's also the question of people operating in the right roles, and whether that's middle management or people in other roles. I've heard the term recently of people being in roles where they're not fully competent, as being like Mozart milking cows or Michelangelo tending sheep. Yeah. And that creates huge problems in organizations as well. Yeah. And if people aren't physically engaged with each other, it's harder to manage that too.
I agree. There'll be books written about all of this, how communication is going to change, how empathy might be affected, how authenticity and alignment. I can just see the myriad of books coming in the next few years, and this is new territory. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yes. Sorry, I should be more professional at this point, but So yes, again, this follows on from what we've just been talking about. But with remote working likely to be the model for many for the foreseeable future, do you see business leaders becoming more remote, or can you see them adopting a new and more holistic approach?
Kind of what you said before. I think there's going to be a combination. It depends on the organizations. But I do think I'd like to just call out some things that I think organizations should be thinking of doing if they really want to take this seriously. And the first thing would be recognizing, around the culture, and not just playing lip service to having an amenable, aligned culture, actually courageously and compassionately and calmly trying to execute on this. So number one would be recognizing that all employees are different, right? We all possess unique talents and abilities, and diversity, right? The embracement of diversity is a core aspect of alignment. And some people will say, well, how can that work if you're embracing differences? How can that be part of alignment? If you're a truly open-minded, forward-thinking organization that really wants to bring out the best in its workforce and its staff, you need to be able to align that diversity. There's no ifs or buts about that. So that's the first thing. The second thing then is the importance of holding clearly thought out core values and ensure that they are simple and measurable, and not just something you stick on a wall, but something that people feel viscerally. And the third thing then would be celebrating success and consistently reviewing, both formally and in reviewing how people are doing. How are they feeling? Are they feeling too remote or too distant? The next one then obviously is about being open and communicating effectively to increase morale and productivity. This is so important. In my experience as a CEO and as a more junior employee in American multinationals, there's nothing worse than, and you see this in politics, I'm not going to mention names, but there's nothing worse than leaders pretending that things are okay, right? When they know that they're not okay, because human beings have a better sense of when things are not okay than when leaders pretend, right? And we feel the vacuum with anxiety. And, you can see this with the States, right? With the leadership in the States, with constant conversation about, we'll all be back to normal by Easter this year. I remember that being said by the president, right? If he doesn't know that for sure, or if anybody doesn't, don't say it. Don't say it, because humans feel the vacuum with anxiety. And I think the final two then would be empower employees as much as you can to solve their own problems. And if you can, embed a culture, something you and I talk about is a culture of mutual confidence and trust within organizations. You have to be able to trust. You still have to have mechanisms to terminate employees, and it sounds tough, but you do need to be courageous at times if they're doing the wrong thing. So I think organizations can do all those things, but they have to be confident and courageous to do that. And a lot of companies just aren't. Hopefully they will become more. So no, it's a big area. It's a big area. So back to you. What 2 or 3 bits of advice would you give someone to connect with their true inner self, and how they portray that externally? How do you think, if you were going to advise me, right? If you're going to say, Simon, these are the 2 or 3 things I think you could do, or to really work on aligning, connecting with your true inner self. What would you focus on?
Okay, 3 things. Number 1 is to learn, and I use the word learn very deliberately, to learn to relax. And that's something most of us have to do, because it does not come naturally, given, again, most of our backgrounds. It may be in some of the Eastern traditions in China, India, etc. But for certainly anybody in the West, it's not part of our upbringing. We're largely unconscious of the importance of relaxation. And when I talk about relaxation, I do not mean sitting in front of the couch or sitting on the couch in front of the TV. I mean conscious relaxation, mind and body united. That for me also involves meditation, learning to meditate, because that creates a state of calmness, it lowers blood pressure, and it enhances mental clarity. And the third one, and they're all very much aligned together in my view anyway, the third one is to become very, very clear about one's values, very clear, and which most of us are not. And again, we've talked about that earlier, and then live accordingly, which is a challenge in today's world. But if we do that, then in my experience, my observation, certainly from all I've learned and studied over the years, is the more likely we are to achieve success and lasting success and enjoy it.
That's profound. And as I said, I was just before this talking on a podcast with my friend Henry Wang with Elizabeth Lee, who is the chairperson of the Sinological Charitable Foundation, and a wonderful and a businesswoman from Hong Kong, and Andrew Conlon Trant, the executive dean here from Dublin Business School. And we were talking about something similar. And basically what she was saying was that unless you know yourself as much as you can, who are you, you can't really truly be of positive value and effect to others in terms of collaborating and supporting. To be able to like, trust, and respect other people, you need to know a little bit about you first. That comes first. And I don't think, at school, nobody teaches us these. They call them soft skills. They're not soft skills. They're core human skills.
Absolutely.
I'm a bit sick of hearing the word soft skills. These are core human interactions. I don't even know, I'm getting a bit passionate about this. I don't even know why we kick them to the side and call them soft skills. They're not,
I agree.
They're the most important. Anyway, I'll get off my high horse for that.
Yeah. So following on, question for you then, what key piece of advice would you give to either current or aspiring business leaders in terms of also aligning with their values and really bringing that to full presence particularly in the professional world?
So I'm going to shamelessly use an example from a book that I'm reading right now, and I've interviewed a French-American management guru called Hortense Le Gentil, and she's written a book called Align, right, which is on point, and so she breaks it down. So I'm quoting her. So she breaks it down into three components, and I think that it's fantastic, right? I can't think of a better way of describing it. So first of all, you need to get to understand who you are. Connect. So this is number one. Understand who you are as much as you can. Connect with the true you. She calls it your why in life, and also, your limitations. Right. I remember I was on 18 years ago. I was the most junior young executive on an Institute of Management, Irish Institute of Management leadership course. It was a residential thing, a week course, and there were some senior executives on this. And the premise of this week was, true leaders can only become truly valuable leaders if they get to know themselves. It's a bit like Star Wars. We all have a dark force in us and a light force in us. All humans have the capacity to kill and love, right? Let's be honest about it. We all have good and evil, right? Whether you believe those terms or not. And the true leaders need to have an appreciation, without getting obsessed with this, of the positive and the negative. Because otherwise you're likely to be blindsided, right? So that's the first thing. Get an understanding of who you are and connect with the why and the who in you, and then only then can you then truly examine your emotions and your boundaries and your capabilities. And then number three, communicate externally what you found out about yourself carefully. You need to create boundaries, your true drives and potential, and let it loose without too much attachment or striving. So, don't expect, just because you've done all that work on yourself, that people are going to think you're wonderful. They might not, but that's part of the authentic journey, is just letting that out, exploring it, letting it out, and see where the universe takes it. And I think that is perfect advice.
Absolutely, yeah. And certainly, the good news and the bad news is that not everybody will like you.
Absolutely.
And it's all okay.
It's okay.
As long as you're aligned.
Yeah. As long as you're you, that's the key thing. And and that's what I'm hoping. If there are younger generations watching this today or in the future, it's about just be you, right? Just tap into you. And that's what the world's looking for. It's you. It's not a chameleon version of you. Anyway, that was wonderful, Joseph. It's flown by. And so how do people find out about you or connect with you?
The easiest way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. That's where I'm probably most active. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and let's proceed from there.
Perfect. And likewise, I'm kind of a bit obsessive with LinkedIn, but I'm also a little bit on Twitter as well. And then my website, Simon Haigh, HAIGH.com, or simon@simonhaigh.com. So it's been wonderful, Joseph. Thanks so much. We must do another one of these, maybe maybe springtime. Let's see whether the world is more or less aligned by then. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Simon. Absolute pleasure.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye.